This is Garden Variety, a horticulture podcast from Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm Charity Nebbe. Oak wilt is a serious disease, and the best way to protect your trees is by pruning them only in the dormant season. Now, no one is telling you to go outside on one of the coldest days of the year to prune your oak trees, but this is a great time to look out the window, make a plan, study the long-term forecast, and put it on your calendar. You can also wait a while to prune most of your other shade trees, but now is a great time to plan for those too. DNR forester Mark Vitosh is here to review the principles of pruning with us. Hello, Mark.
Good morning.
And this is a great day to stay inside, but it is the right season to prune your oak trees. Fill in a little bit more about that. Why is that so important?
We've talked about it many times on the show, but oak wilt is a vascular disease. It's very common on oak trees. It's the most susceptible species are the red oaks, red oak, pin oak, shingle oak, species like that. And basically, it's a systemic disease. And once that tree gets it, it will die. And especially with the red oaks, they'll die in 6 to 8 weeks during the summertime. So it gets through the system and dies fairly quickly. You can also get it on white oaks, bur oaks, and others too. So basically, all oaks are susceptible. But the key thing is in the summertime, basically during the growing season, if there are open wounds, there's a beetle called a picnic beetle that can actually carry the fungus from trees that had died the year before and actually bring the spores to an open wound. And as they feed on the sap of that wound during the growing season, those spores can attach to that wound and the fungus can actually grow into the tree. There's a lot more to oak wilt. It can go through root grafts from one tree to the next and all that. But the best way to prevent on our side, if we have trees that we can control, is to not prune oak trees during the growing season. We basically recommend if you're going to prune oaks, I tend to recommend that you wait till you get a couple good frosts in November, and then typically try to be done by the 1st of March. We in the DNR actually monitor those beetles in the springtime, and sometimes that date to stop pruning might be just a little before March 1st, and sometimes it goes as late as March 12th. So we actually look at degree days of that insect to see when it's out, especially in southern Iowa. Once we know that, we put out a news release and say, hey, stop pruning your oaks. And like I said, it's usually between March 1st and March 12th. But the best way we can prevent that is if we're going to prune oaks is to do it in the wintertime.
Right. So pick a nice weekend in
Not
January
this weekend.
or February and get the work done. Oak are very important to prune only in the dormant season. Are there other trees that's also an issue for?
I go back and forth on this, but I would probably put elm in that too. We have Dutch elm disease, which is also carried by a beetle, but that beetle can actually attack a tree anyway. But if you have open wounds, it can make it more susceptible. So if I had a nice quality elm, I would probably also prune that in the wintertime. But if we have a maple tree, a birch tree, a linden tree, or tulip poplar, crab apples, if you're out in the summer and you're getting hit in the head with a branch here and there, you can prune during the growing season on some of those non-critical species. The dormant season, though, in general, is just a nice time because you can see the structure. And structure is one of the key things that we can do with pruning developing trees, is pruning out weak branches, poor angles, stuff like that. So it's a lot easier to see that structure in the wintertime than it is during the growing season.
Well, that gets to why we prune. And I know it's hard for some people to cut a limb off a tree. We tend to have very soft feelings for our trees that we love. But by pruning, we're actually making these trees stronger and hopefully giving them the opportunity to stand up to crazy weather conditions and things like that, right?
By proper pruning, we're doing those things.
Okay.
But we can do improper pruning and actually make a tree weaker or actually hurt that tree a little bit if we do it improper. The thing to remember, too, is pruning is a natural thing that happens on a tree on its own. If you go out in the woods, A lot of trees don't have lower branches because there's a lot of shade. And those lower branches, as they're developing on a younger tree in the woods, they don't get a lot of sunlight. And a tree is very efficient. Hey, you're not producing enough food for me. I'm going to shut you down. So they actually shut that branch down, and that tree dies naturally. And then that tree naturally sheds through gravity, ice, snow. That branch falls off, and then that tree starts to seal that wound around it normally. So pruning is a natural thing that happens. But we prune for purpose. We prune for structure. We prune for aesthetics. And we prune because we don't want to get hit in the head when we're mowing that lawn in August. So we have different reasons, and we're not talking about apple trees, but with apple trees, we prune for production. We prune for better flower production. So when we're pruning for a purpose.
All right. And this time of year, as you said, is a great time to look at a tree and really see its structure. Make your plans for proper pruning. There are great resources online that you can read in depth. But when I'm looking at a shade tree and I'm thinking about pruning, what am I looking for?
Well, if we're looking at a shade tree, the thing we really want to determine is what are the permanent branches and what are the temporary branches. And what I mean by that, let's say clearance, we know we have a shade tree growing in the front yard, and we know that we eventually want 7 foot of clearance because we want to see the neighbor's house, or we want to see that prairie on the other side, or whatever. The thing to remember is if I have branches at 3 feet right now, those branches will always be at 3 feet. That tree grows from the tips. There's meristems there that actually allow growth for that branch to get longer. There's a meristem called the cambium where the trunk or the branch in the trunk gets bigger, but trees don't stretch like we do. So if I have branches, if I'm going to prune up to, if I want 7 foot clearance and I'm looking at a 10-foot tree and I have branches in that first 10 feet, that means on that 10-foot tree, 7 foot of those branches are going to be gone, okay? The thing that we don't want to do, though, is we don't want to go out after this talk and looking through all these manuals in 2 weeks go and prune up to 7 feet. We want to do that over time.
Right, because if you have a 10-foot tree and you prune up to 7 feet, then that tree doesn't have enough branches and leaves to feed itself
I
and
call
continue
those
growing, right?
the truffula trees, as Lorex would say. I speak for the trees,
Right.
So I'm speaking for the truffula tree. And we have to remember that trees need leaves. Well, leaves come from buds that are on branches. So the more branches we can leave on that tree, the better for that tree. And in general, depending what literature you look at, we tend to say we try to leave about 60 to 70%, 2/3 of that tree and crown at all times. Even as they mature, we don't want to take too much, do too much thinning because trees need leaves. So we want to do that slowly. What I tend to say is I try to leave those branches. If I know I'm going to prune up to 7 feet, it may take me 5 to 10 years to get to that. It may take me 15 years to get to that height because I tend to want to leave those lower branches till they're about 1 inch in diameter. And you'll see different rules, but I tend to try to get them off before they're 2 inches. 2 inches is a good wound size that I'm minimizing the wound. And remember, trees don't heal, they seal. They actually close that wound shut. And the bigger that wound is, the more difficult it is for it to seal. So I may only prune a branch a year for multiple years until I get to that point. The other thing that I look at early, though, where I don't use the 2-inch rule, is if I have a shade tree that I know typically I want one straight leader, I want it going up straight and strong. If I start to get a fork and I have two leaders that create a V connection, that can often be what we call included bark, and it's a weaker connection that if we leave that double leader there 20 years down the road in a windstorm, that can break and half the tree can be gone. But I can go when that tree is younger and prune that out. It's easier to make that cut because it's a little more difficult. So I don't use that 2-inch rule. If I have a double leader, that may be the only thing I prune the first couple years, or a broken branch here or there. But then as those branches develop, then I'll start to do my lifting.
When you make a cut, do you have some advice about that to make a clean cut that can seal properly?
So we used to tell you, a long time ago, they used to say, take your saw and put it up to the trunk and kind of cut flush. But they looked at trees' natural pruning and natural response to wounds and stuff. And there's an area where the trunk and the branch meet. It's called the branch bark ridge. There's a little ridge between those two. And just outside that ridge, towards the branch, there's a collar. And if you look at your hand and put your thumb out, your thumb is the branch. As you go back towards your hand, it starts to swell. That's usually the collar, kind of where your knuckle is towards your hand. You can actually feel that swelling. That's called the branch collar. Every branch collar is kind of different on a different species. So your final cut should be at the same angle as that branch collar. The other thing we do, even on small branches, is we typically use hand saws, hand pruners. We don't need the chainsaw when we're developing young trees. And usually we don't need a ladder either to be safe. We may have a little step ladder or something like that to get a little bit. But often on those branches, I'll go out maybe 12 inches, make a bottom cut, go an inch from that, make a top cut, cause the weight of the branch to fall off so it doesn't rip. And then I'll go back to my collar and make that final third cut. That way I'm minimizing the wound that I create. If I try to cut that branch and hold the branch and that rips down, I've gone from a 2-inch wound to maybe a 3-inch wound, and that's going to cause damage.
And I still see tree sealant for sale in lawn and garden stores. Do I ever need that, Mark?
You know, they're doing a lot of research, and maybe that recommendation will change someday, but generally we don't need any kind of wound dressing. The only time we might need is if we're in the summertime and we have an oak that's wounded and we have to prune it because of a broken branch or something. Get some latex paint and put it on that wound immediately after to try to deter the beetle from it. But other than that, keep it in the shed.
DNR District Forester Mark Vitosh. For more gardening information and tips, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Find out more at iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. Garden Variety is a production of Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension. It's produced by me, Erin Stile, Caitlin Troutman, and the Iowa Public Radio talk show team. For more garden goodness, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Just go to iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. See you next time.